The wind had teeth in it, a sharp November bite that promised an early and hard winter for Wyoming. Ada Callum felt it through the worn wool of her coat, a cold that settled deep in her bones, mirroring the chill of the decision she carried. She rode with her back straight, a habit her father had drilled into her, as if posture alone could ward off the world's blows. It could not. Her mare, Clover, stepped carefully along the rutted track leading to the Harding ranch, her gray coat a soft blur against the bruised purple of the sky. In her pocket, a folded notice from the Crestfall Bank felt heavier than any stone. $18. It was an insultingly small sum to lose a legacy over, yet it was as insurmountable as the mountains hulking on the horizon. The debt had to be settled by sundown, or her father's small holding, the land he had bled and sweat for, would be signed over to the bank. She had one thing of value left. Clover flicked an ear back, sensing the tension in the reins, in the rigid set of Ada's shoulders. Ada reached forward and stroked the mare's neck, the coarse hair familiar and comforting. Just a little farther, girl. The price she had settled on in her mind was $20. It felt like a betrayal. A horse like Clover, with her steady gait and good sense, was worth 3 times that, maybe more. But need had a way of gutting value from a thing. $20 would pay the debt and leave her with 2, enough for a bag of flour and perhaps some coffee. Enough to face the next day. Beyond that, she could not see. The gate to the Harding ranch was solid, made of thick, peeled logs that spoke of permanence and prosperity. It was a world away from her own patched-together fences and leaning barn. She dismounted, her boots sinking into the cold mud, and worked the latch. Her hands were stiff, clumsy with cold and dread. Leading Clover through, she secured the gate behind her and stood for a moment, gathering what little courage she had left. Her father, in his last lucid days, had told her, "If it comes to it, Ada, you take Clover to Eli Harding. He's a fair man." She had clung to those words, a fair man, as if they were a guarantee. Now, standing before the long, low ranch house with smoke curling from its stone chimney, fairness felt like a distant country. A man emerged from the largest of the barns, his stride long and unhurried. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, wearing a sheepskin coat against the encroaching dusk. As he drew closer, she saw the lines around his eyes, the set of a jaw that was used to making decisions and seeing them through. This was Eli Harding. He was 35, a man settled into his life while hers was coming apart at the seams. He stopped a dozen feet from her, his gaze taking in everything at once. He looked at her, then at the mare. He looked at the way she held the reins, not loosely, but with a proprietary grip. He looked at the proud, straight line of her back and the exhaustion she could not quite hide in her eyes. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that seemed to fit the solid landscape around them. "Mr. Harding," Ada replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Ada Callum. My father was John Callum, from the quarter section east of here." Eli nodded slowly. He knew the Callum place. Knew John had passed a year ago. He'd seen the daughter in town once or twice, a quiet woman who kept to herself. "I remember your father. A good man." A pause stretched between them, filled only by the sighing of the wind. She was not going to be the one to say any of this first. She finally broke the silence, the words tasting like ash. "I've come to sell my horse." Eli's eyes moved back to Clover, a long, appraising look that missed nothing. He saw the strong legs, the clear eyes, the good conformation. He saw a horse that had been cared for, loved even. Then his gaze returned to Ada. "No, you haven't," he said, not unkindly. Ada's chin lifted a fraction. "I am selling her. Her name is Clover. She's a fine saddle horse, good temperament, not spooked by much. I'm asking $20. The price," spoken aloud, shamed her. Eli took a step closer, his focus entirely on her. He ignored the horse now. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, the determined set of her mouth. He saw a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, pretending she was only there to admire the view. "How much is the debt, Miss Callum?" he asked, his voice quiet. The question disarmed her. She had prepared for haggling, for dismissiveness, for pity. Not for this direct, calm inquiry. That's not your concern. If you're on my land trying to sell a horse you don't want to part with for a price that's an insult to the animal, I figure it becomes my concern," he stated, a simple declaration of fact. He looked toward the west, where the sun was a smear of dying orange. "And I figure you're running out of time." Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, hot and sharp. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this man. $18, she whispered, the sound stolen by the wind. He nodded once, as if she had just confirmed a detail in a long and simple equation. He did not ask what the debt was for. He did not ask why she had let it get to this point. The arithmetic was enough. "You can put your mare in the near paddock," he said, gesturing with his head. "There's good feed there, and a windbreak. She'll be more comfortable." Ada stared at him, confused. "But the sale. We're not talking about a sale," he said. He turned and started walking toward the house. "Come inside. I'll write you a note for the bank." She stood frozen for a moment, the reins slack in her hand. Nothing was proceeding as she had planned. He was taking control of the situation with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. She led Clover to the paddock, her mind racing. The gate was smooth and well-oiled. Inside, a deep bed of hay and a trough of clean water waited. Clover lowered her head to it immediately. The relief of seeing her horse safe and provided for was so profound it almost buckled Ada's knees. She followed him to the house, wiping her boots on the mat by the door. The inside was warm and smelled of wood smoke, leather, and coffee. It was a man's space, tidy but unadorned. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a fire crackled there, casting a warm glow on the simple, sturdy furniture. He had moved to a heavy oak desk in the corner. The desk was the one point of chaos in the otherwise orderly room. It was buried in stacks of paper, ledgers, and receipts. He cleared a small space, found a pen and inkwell, and scrawled a few lines on a piece of paper. He folded it and handed it to her. "Give this to Mr. Abernathy at the bank. He'll settle the account and send the bill to me." Ada held the paper. It was a lifeline, but it was also a debt, a new one, owed to this stranger. "I don't know how I can repay you, Mr. Harding." Eli looked from her to the chaotic desk, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I might have a way." "You have schooling?" "Yes. My mother was a teacher. She taught me to read and write, and my figures are good." "My figures are not," he said, with a wry twist of his lips. "And my bookkeeper quit 3 years ago to get married. I've been meaning to hire someone, but I've been busy." He gestured to the mountain of paper. "It's 3 years of accounts. I suspect my suppliers have been enjoying my lack of attention. I'll pay you a fair wage. You can work off what I'm paying the bank, and then some. You can start tomorrow." It was not a question. It was a solution. The arithmetic, as he had said, was simple. She had no land to work now, no income. She had a debt of honor to him. She had a horse to feed. "All right, Mr. Harding," she said, the words feeling solid and real in the warm room. "I accept." "Eli," he corrected her gently. "My name is Eli." "Ada," she replied. He nodded. "You'd best get to town before the bank closes." He walked her to the door, opening it to the now deep twilight. A lamp had been lit on the porch, a small, brave circle of gold against the vast darkness. "What about Clover?" she asked, her voice small. "She can stay," he said. "The ride back and forth is long, and the feed is better here." He looked out at the road going out into the dark beyond it. I'll leave the lamp on for you until I see you're past the bend in the road." Ada rode to Crestfall in a daze, the banker's note tucked safely inside her coat. The world had shifted on its axis. She had ridden out that afternoon expecting to lose her horse and save her land. Instead, she was keeping her horse, losing her land, and had found employment. When she handed the note to Mr. Abernathy, he read it, looked at her over the top of his spectacles, and stamped the Callum account paid in full without a word. The town looked out for her. She was beginning to understand that the town, in its own way, was Eli Harding. The next morning, she returned. The lamp on his porch was out. She let herself into the house, which was empty but for the banked fire and a pot of coffee warming on the hearth. She poured a cup. It was strong and bitter, but hot. She walked to the desk, took a sip, and surveyed the task ahead. It was worse than she had imagined. Receipts were shoved into ledgers at random. Invoices were unpaid, while others had clearly been paid twice. The handwriting was a barely decipherable scrawl that shifted from Eli's hand to various ranch hands, all of whom seemed to have a deep mistrust of spelling and arithmetic. She rolled up her sleeves. She started by sorting. Piles for receipts, for invoices, for livestock sales, for wages. She found a stack of fresh, empty ledgers in a bottom drawer, a sign of good intentions long since abandoned. She opened the first one, dipped a fresh nib into the ink, and made the first entry, October 1884. For the first week, she worked in silence. Eli would come in from the cold, stamping his feet and shedding his coat, and nod to her before pouring himself a cup of the wretched coffee. He would sit by the fire, mending a piece of harness leather or just staring into the flames, a quiet, solid presence on the other side of the room. He never asked how it was going. He seemed to trust that she would simply handle it. The quiet between them was a physical thing. At first, it felt heavy, freighted with the awkwardness of their arrangement. She was acutely aware of the sound of her pen scratching, the rustle of paper, the soft tick of the mantel clock. She felt his eyes on her sometimes, a steady, unreadable gaze, and she would feel a flush rise on her neck. But slowly, the silence changed. It became less of a void and more of a shared space. It settled, becoming comfortable, like a well-worn coat. She learned the rhythm of his day without asking. The heavy tread of his boots in the morning, the distant sound of him calling to his men, the tired slump of his shoulders when he finally came in at dusk. By the second week, she had uncovered the truth she had suspected. His main supplier for grain and salt licks, a firm from Cheyenne, had been systematically overcharging him for years. Small amounts on each invoice, a few cents here, $1 there, but over 3 years it added up to a significant sum. Hundreds of dollars. She gathered the evidence, laying out the fraudulent invoices next to the supplier's own price lists from old catalogs she found. She made neat columns of figures, a stark and undeniable accounting of the theft. That evening, when he came in, she did not wait for him to settle by the fire. "Eli," she said, her voice clear and direct. He turned, surprised by her tone. "You need to look at this." She gestured to the organized papers on the desk. He walked over, his large frame dwarfing the desk. He leaned over, his sleeve brushing her arm as he examined the papers. She could smell the cold air on his coat, the scent of horse and winter. He was silent for a long time, his finger tracing the lines of her careful figures. She watched his jaw tighten. "Well, I'll be," he said softly, a low note of anger in his voice. That slick-haired fellow always did smile too much. He straightened up and looked at her, his eyes holding a new respect. "How much?" "Just over $400 by my count." He let out a long, slow breath. "That's a new saddle and 6 tons of hay." He looked from the papers to her, and a small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. "I knew my figures were bad. I didn't know they were that expensive." He shook his head. "Thank you, Ada." It was a turning point. The work was no longer just a means to repay a debt. It was a partnership. She was no longer just the woman he had helped. She was the guardian of his finances, the one who brought order to his chaos. The next morning, the coffee pot held a brew that was rich and smooth. He had bought new beans in town, a small, unspoken acknowledgement, a thank you she could taste. A few days later, she began leaving a covered plate of whatever she had made for her own supper on the corner of the desk for him. A thick slice of cornbread, a bowl of rabbit stew. She never mentioned it, and he never mentioned it, but every morning the plate was empty and clean, stacked neatly by the inkwell. The days shortened, and the darkness came swiftly after she finished her work. The ride to her father's old cabin was short, but the road was dark and lonely. Every evening, as she rode away, she would look back at the ranch house, and every evening, the lamp on his porch would stay lit, a single point of light in the vast, dark landscape. She would watch it until she rounded the bend in the road, and only then would it go out. He was watching her home. The gesture was so simple, so practical. It was not a declaration or a flirtation. It was just a lamp, but it felt like more. It felt like a steady hand at her back. It was in these quiet moments, riding toward the light or sipping the good coffee he made, that she finally understood her father's last words. Take Clover to Eli Harding. He hadn't said it because Eli was a fair man who would give her a good price. He had said it because he knew Eli was the kind of man who wouldn't buy the horse at all. He had sent her not to a transaction but to a sanctuary. He had sent her home. The rhythm of their life settled into a comfortable pattern. The days were filled with the quiet industry of her work and his. The evenings were pools of shared silence, broken by the crackle of the fire or the turning of a page. He started talking to her more, not about feelings but about the ranch. He told her about a stubborn new bull, about the way the north pasture flooded in the spring, about his plans to build a new barn come summer. He spoke of the future as if it were a given that she would be there to hear about it. One Saturday, she rode into Crestfall for supplies. The town was small enough that news traveled on the wind. Her presence at the Harding Ranch was common knowledge. As she stepped out of the general store, a man tipped his hat to her. He was well dressed, in a city suit and polished boots that looked out of place on the muddy street. "Miss Callum," he said. "A pleasure to see you in town." It was Mr. Davies, the banker's junior partner. He was considered a good catch, a man with prospects. "Mr. Davies," she replied politely. "I trust you are finding your new arrangement satisfactory?" he asked, his smile a little too smooth. "I am, thank you. It is a fine thing Mr. Harding has done," he continued, "though I confess the whole town is surprised he finally took notice of his own accounts." He offered her his arm. "May I escort you? The street is treacherous." "Thank you, but I am quite all right," she said, stepping around him with a firm but polite nod. His interest felt like an assessment, as if he were calculating her value. She did not know that Eli was across the street, loading grain into his wagon. He saw the exchange. He saw the way Davies looked at her, the proprietary way he offered his arm. And he saw the cool, dignified way Ada refused him. A feeling, hot and unfamiliar, coiled in his gut. It was a raw, primitive anger. He had no name for it, but it felt like watching a wolf circle a lamb he had sworn to protect. He finished his business quickly, his movements sharp and abrupt. On the way back to the ranch, his thoughts were a storm. He had thought of his arrangement with Ada in practical terms. He needed a bookkeeper. She needed a job. It was a fair exchange. But seeing Davies near her had thrown that simple equation into chaos. He thought of the quiet way she moved about his house, the scent of the soap she used, the furrow of concentration on her brow when she worked. He thought of the empty, silent house before she had come. He had not realized how silent it was until it was filled with the soft scratch of her pen. The next day, he went to the general store himself. Silas, the owner, was an old man with eyes that missed nothing. He bagged Eli's flour and coffee beans, his movements slow and deliberate. "Saw your bookkeeper in town yesterday," Silas commented, not looking up. "Did you?" Eli said. It was not a question. "I did. So did Mr. Davies. He's a man looking for a wife to match his ambitions." Silas finally looked at Eli, his gaze direct and knowing. "She's a fine woman, Ada Callum. Capable. Kind. Been through more than her share of trouble." Eli just nodded, his jaw tight. "You know, Eli," Silas said, leaning on the counter, "for a man who can read a storm in the sky a week out, you have a remarkable inability to see what's standing right in front of you." He gestured vaguely, in the direction of Eli's ranch. "The whole town sees it. She's brought order to more than just your books. But a woman like that won't wait forever. Patience runs out. Even for the patient ones." Eli paid for his goods and left without another word. The ride home was long. Silas's words were like stones thrown into a still pond, the ripples spreading out to touch every corner of his quiet life. He was slow. He had always been slow with things that were not ranching. Slow to anger, slow to decide, slow to understand the matters of the heart that other men seemed to navigate with ease. He realized he wasn't just leaving the lamp on for her. He was waiting to see the small shadow of her and Clover pass the bend, a confirmation that she was safe. He wasn't just grateful for the tidiness of his ledgers. He was grateful for her presence, for the way she had filled a space in his house, in his life, that he hadn't even known was empty. He thought of Mr. Davies, with his smooth talk and his city suit, and the anger returned, clearer this time. It was the simple, fierce instinct of a man wanting to protect what was his. Was she his? No, she was her own, but he wanted her to be. He wanted to be hers. The realization settled over him, as solid and undeniable as the ground beneath his feet. It was not a lightning strike. It was the slow dawn he had been too blind to see. He did not sleep that night. He sat by the dying fire, the house silent around him, and felt her absence like a physical ache. He had offered her a job, a roof for her horse, a wage. He had offered her everything but the one thing that mattered. The next evening, when she began to pack her few things to leave, he stood up from his chair by the fire. His heart was pounding, a loud, unsteady drum against his ribs. "Ada," he said. She turned, a question in her eyes. "Yes, Eli?" He walked toward the desk, stopping on the other side of it. It was the space that had defined their relationship, this piece of furniture laden with their shared work. He felt awkward, clumsy, a man more comfortable with branding irons than with words of feeling. "The books are nearly done," he started, his voice rougher than usual. "You've done a fine job, finer than I had any right to expect." "It was the work I was hired for," she said simply, her hand stilling on a stack of papers. He shook his head. "It was more than that." He looked at her, really looked at her, at the quiet strength in her face, the intelligence in her clear gray eyes. "Silas told me I was slow. He was right." A faint blush touched her cheeks, but she said nothing. She waited. He took a breath, the words coming out plain and unadorned, the only way he knew how to speak. "I don't want you to ride back to that cabin anymore. I don't want to watch for your light on the road." He paused, searching for the right way to say it all. He thought of her horse, the animal that had brought her here, the catalyst for this entire new chapter of his life. The words finally came, direct and true. "Keep him," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Keep Clover. Come home with me." It was not a proposal of marriage, not yet. It was something more fundamental. It was an invitation to stop journeying, to stop enduring, to simply be. Here, with him. Ada stood perfectly still. The mantel clock ticked loudly in the sudden, profound silence. She looked at his face, at the earnest, raw hope in his eyes, a vulnerability she had never seen there before. The careful walls she had built around her own heart, the patient resilience she had mistaken for a permanent state of being, crumbled into dust. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile of such pure, unadulterated relief that it made her beautiful. A small, wry laugh escaped her. "Eli Harding," she said, her voice soft and full of a gentle, humorous rebuke. "I was beginning to think you would never ask." His answer was to close the distance between them, rounding the desk and taking her hands in his. They were small and cool, swallowed up in his large, warm grasp. Yes, obviously yes. Their courtship was as quiet and steady as they were. It was not a thing of grand gestures, but of small, meaningful acts. He rode with her to her father's cabin and helped her pack the few belongings she treasured: her mother's books, her father's worn armchair, a quilt she had made. They worked side by side, the silence between them now filled with an easy, unspoken intimacy. They took Sunday rides, not with him watching her go, but with them riding together, Clover and his own big roan stepping in unison. He showed her the boundaries of his land, the high pastures that looked out over the entire valley, the creek where he had fished as a boy. He was not just showing her a ranch, he was showing her a life. Her life. He formally proposed a month later, on the porch of the ranch house, as the sun set. He did not go down on one knee. He simply turned to her and said, "I would like you to be my wife, Ada." And she had replied, "I would like that very much." They were married in the small church in Crestfall on a bright, cold day in early spring. Ada wore a simple dress of dark blue wool, the color of a twilight sky. She had sewn it herself. Eli stood beside her, looking slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, but his eyes, when they rested on her, were full of a deep and abiding peace. The whole town was there. Silas gave her away, his old eyes twinkling. Mr. Davies sat in the back pew, looking resigned. It felt less like a wedding and more like a confirmation of something that was already true. 5 years later, the November wind still had teeth, but it no longer felt like a threat. It was just the turning of the season. Ada sat on the porch swing of the ranch house, a mending basket in her lap. The swing, a gift from Eli, moved in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Eli sat in a chair beside her, cleaning a rifle, his movements economical and precise. The lamplight from the window spilled out onto the porch, a warm, golden pool in the dusk. A small boy of 4, with his father's steady brown eyes and his mother's determined chin, was lining up wooden soldiers on the porch steps. A little girl of 2, with a cloud of dark hair and a mischievous smile, toddled over and knocked them all down with a gleeful shriek. The boy looked up, his face a mask of indignation. "Mama, Sarah knocked over my cavalry." "Cavalry needs to be tougher than that, John," Eli said without looking up from his work. Ada smiled. "Be nice to your sister," she told her son gently. "She's just helping them practice falling down." John considered this, then began setting his soldiers up again, a bit more sturdily this time. The quiet settled around them again, comfortable and deep. It was the same quiet from all those years ago in the dusty office, but now it was woven through with the small sounds of family, of a life built together. Eli finished with the rifle and leaned it against the wall. He looked at Ada, at the way the lamplight caught the silver threads that were just beginning to appear in her hair. He reached over and stilled the swing, his hand resting on her arm. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She looked out at the dark line of the fence, at Clover and the roan standing head to tail in the paddock, their shapes dark against the fading light. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice soft, "that you are a very slow man, Eli Harding." He smiled, a slow, easy smile that reached his eyes. "I got there, didn't I?" "You got there," she agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. He was solid. He was steady. He was home. The wind blew, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth, But here on the porch, in the golden circle of light, it was only warmth. That's the thing about a quiet love. It doesn't announce itself with thunder and lightning. It builds itself slowly, quietly, out of small everyday gestures, a lamp left burning, a cup of good coffee, a shared silence that feels more like a conversation than any words ever could. It is a love built on the steady foundation of character, a patient anchor in the storms of life. It's not about finding someone who will save you, but about finding the person who will give you the safety to save yourself and then build a home with you right where you stand.